دبي موئل الثقافات وحاضنة الإبداع، تحتضن بين أركانها مزيجا فريدا من الثقافات والتقاليد، حيث يلتقي التراث العريق مع الفكر الحديث. على مر العصور كانت دبي مركزا للحوار الحضاري وبيئة مثالية لتلاقي العقول والأفكار من مختلف أرجاء العالم، ساعية دوما لتعزيز ثقافة المعرفة والانفتاح. وهنا اليوم في قلب دبي حيث يبنى المستقبل، في هذا الصرح الثقافي مكتبة محمد بن راشد تلتقي نخبة من العقول من جميع أنحاء العالم في حدث يجمع بين أمجاد الماضي وتحديات الحاضر ورؤى المستقبل. أهلا بكم في أول نسخة من مؤتمر دبي الدولي للمكتبات، حيث تبدأ رحلة جديدة لإعادة تعريف دور المكتبات في العالم. أكثر من 60 خبيرا من 25 دولة يجتمعون ليطرحوا رؤى جديدة ستعيد تشكيل مفهوم المكتبات. استعدوا لاستكشاف التحول الرقمي في المكتبات عبر الذكاء الاصطناعي واكتشاف الكنوز الأيقونية والمجموعات النادرة. من خلال أكثر من 60 جلسة نلقي الضوء على مستقبل المكتبات وأهمية التراث والمعرفة للأجيال القادمة. إنه الحدث الذي سيخلد في تاريخ المكتبات، مؤتمر دبي الدولي للمكتبات 2024، حيث يجتمع الماضي والحاضر والمستقبل. دبي موئل الثقافات وحاضنة الإبداع، تحتضن بين أركانها مزيجا فريدا من الثقافات والتقاليد، حيث يلتقي التراث العريق مع الفكر الحديث. على مر العصور كانت دبي مركزا للحوار الحضاري وبيئة مثالية لتلاقي العقول والأفكار من
Dr. Colin Bailey, Miss Sharon Memes with the moderator Isabel Abulhol.
Have we each got a mic? Are we short one mic? I have one. I think it's on, actually. I think it's on. Don't need it. Assalamu alaikum. Anyone who is wandering around the library at the end of the library conference, please make your way over here, because this is our final session of our International Library Conference, Edition 1. So please don't miss out on hearing from our incredible speakers about a book or books that have changed their lives. As many librarians here will know, books influence us in so many ways and can change lives. And as librarians, you are often the person to recommend a book or to find a book that will inspire another young person. So please don't miss out on this wonderful opportunity. I'm joined on stage with Masood Koka, who is the University Librarian and Keeper of the Brotherton Collection at the University of Leeds, and is also the current chair of Research Libraries UK. Dr. Colin B. Bailey has served as director of the Morgan Library Museum, New York, since 2015, and Sharon Memes, who took up the role of Secretary General and CEO of IFLA in June 2023. A big round of applause. So what we would love to talk about today is the journey of life. And books that we come across can help us, can change an opinion, can send us off in a completely different direction. And I'm sure each of you here will have had that experience and experiences, because at different times of your life, books will have a different impact and a different importance. They can reset our path, inspire our futures, or help heal us. So we want to find out from our speakers, what are the book or books that they consider important in their lives, that have become favorites and that have given them something that perhaps they can only find in that journey as a reader, listening in their heads to a writer. So I'm going to start with Masood. And Masood, when I emailed you, the email said, please can you share the title of your favorite book? And Masood did what most of us would do, and he sent back at least 3, if not more. So Masood, let's start with the first one, which was, I don't think, surprising, but it's wonderful. I'd love you to tell our audience here today what it was and why you think about it as still a very favorite book.
I think, firstly, this is my favorite session of the whole conference, and I've done a few, but nonetheless, this is the one I was looking forward to the most. And that's because this is such a personal story, and the joy of books is that you can be moved into so many different directions, you can be moved into so many different wonders through that. And therefore, when I was thinking about this, I went back and I thought, I will talk about what's personally impacted me the most. They will not be the big names. You would not have heard about these books before, but they were the ones that opened up new imagination and new sort of wonders for me. Almost everyone, I hope, would have heard of Harry Potter series. When I was growing up, there was no Harry Potter at that time in Pakistan as a young child. And my father was the National Librarian of Pakistan, so he would often have books on his bookshelf that I would be like, what is this? This is about really deep poetry, deep literature, which as a young child, I would not be inspired by or grasp the full understanding of. But one really good thing that happened was that all the school libraries and public libraries also came under my father's remit. And he said, have you been to this children's library? So he pushed me towards the children's library. I was probably about 7 or 8 at this time. And I picked up a book randomly about a family whose father is an inspector in police, and they go all across Pakistan on spy missions. And they look at really deep mysteries, they solve it, there's some magic in there, there's familial dynamics in there, and I got hooked onto these. But I got hooked onto these not because of what was being discussed, but because of the imagination that it inspired. You could see yourself as a child of that person. I could see myself in the same position. I can see myself thinking about how would I send secret messages if I was in that place? How would I deal with these kind of familiar conflicts? And without me knowing at that time, what that series of books did to me was it just allowed me to imagine. And that's the power I genuinely believe books have. They empower you to imagine. They empower you to think. They empower you to find yourselves in positions, and they can act as role models for you. And that series of books really did that for me. But more importantly, the reason I'm a librarian now is because of those books. And there's a very bizarre link to this, which is growing up, because of this, my father thought he can convert me into a librarian. And because I was reading a lot of fiction, I was hooked on to these books. So when I was about 13, he took me to the National Library and said, here are all the amazing research collections. Why don't you become a librarian? I said, oh, this looks very boring, Dad. I do not want to be a librarian. And I decided to choose computer science. And next few years of my life, I was not reading anymore. But when I was looking for a part-time job, which I found in a library, I actually went back to the same books to reignite that love. I didn't love them in the same way as I used to love them when I was a child, but actually that love of reading sparked again, and that just made me find a whole career in libraries all over again. So that's the book that has made me a librarian today, because of that imagination and wonder that it opened up for me.
That is wonderful. And I think books we read as children mark us forever. If we are lucky enough to have access to books, millions of children around the world do not have access to books. And that is the job that the Library Conference, these wonderful organizations that look over libraries across the world, are working tirelessly towards, and that has been a central theme of the conference, is how can we ensure that libraries continue and thrive and provide the wonderful services that they are so known for. And I'm going to move on to Colin, and you chose something incredible. Do you want to?
I'm very happy to talk about it. I'm afraid I need a clicker because I have a presentation.
Oh, right, a clicker. Do we have a clicker?
I have a
We have
PowerPoint.
those cursed clickers. Is that okay?
Anything, just to...
It's up here. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay, that's great. Well, while Isabel's getting the clicker,
Here
let
we
me...
go. I'd forgotten. Sorry.
It's all
There
right.
we go.
Okay. Yeah. I read the brief rather differently. When I was asked this question, perhaps I was reading too quickly, I thought it meant what book that in my library, in the Morgan Library, was the most significant. And it gave me a chance to talk about a truly beautiful object, which I will spend my allotted time talking to you about. But I would say, just in the spirit of this conference, hearing about the power of libraries when one is a child. I still remember the Czech librarian in North London who introduced me to reading and allowed me to to actually work on putting cellophane covers on the book jackets as part of as a 9-year-old volunteer. So yes, we absolutely believe in the value of going to libraries young. But this is a different type of book, and this is a book that you have to judge by its cover. It is the Lindau Gospels, and it is one of the most beautiful medieval objects in the Morgan's collection. It has jeweled covers, and we will see 2 covers. It has exquisite backings and illuminated pages. You see a border of emeralds, of garnets, of gold, and you see in the middle the figure of Christ on the cross, and drops of blood just coming from the nails. You will see also an inscription, Hic est Rex Judaeorum, here is the King of the Jews. And we see above Christ these figures of the sun and the moon in mourning. We see reclining figures. All the grief is palpable. Below, the Virgin Mary and St. John the Evangelist. The forms are in relief. The gold forms are in relief, known as repoussé, and this means that they were beaten out from behind the cover, so you see nothing of the marks of the actual hammers, tiny hammers. This is the front cover, and if we look at it when we place it on the foredge, this is the back cover, and this back cover was made. This you can see has a figure of. In the middle, there's a gold, a topaz, where the original relic would be, and this is made of champ-levé enamel and silver gilt. So a different type of book, a cover from the first one. And when we look at this book from as it were, when it's set down, you can see that we almost have a sense of the holy city of Jerusalem, the holy center of the world as it was then. Now, the first cover was made in about 1870. The second cover was made much earlier, in 770. So these are covers that were not actually made at the same time. And they were also, the inside of the covers had these beautiful Byzantine silks that were probably made in the 9th century. And to think about an object from Europe at this moment with these beautiful interiors, we see falcons with rings. These are inspired by someone who has seen falcons, a maker from Byzantium. So this is actually a global book. But what about the pages themselves? This book was, these were handwritten scribal pages showing the writing of the 4 Gospels, and they were done in a monastery in East Francia around 990. The book was already a great object in this monastery. But by the 19th century, the monastery was disestablished. The book was sold to an English book collector. He did not offer it to the British Museum, and he held on to it until he died. His son, in 1890, made it available on the market, and it was acquired in 1899. So think about it. No museum, no library at that time was interested to buy it. But it was bought in 1899 by John Pierpont Morgan, who was just beginning his collection, and it is actually one of the great works in the collection. I'm so proud of the fact that it is fully digitized. You can go through every page and see every image, and it also occupies pride of place on public view in one of our rooms. This is in a way an object that would be impossible to find today, and although I don't have a story about it changing my life, it has certainly changed my role as a museum director to understand the complexity and the interest and the brilliant acquisition that was made in 1899. Thank you.
That was absolutely incredible. And the craftsmanship and the different elements in it that went in to create a work of art that is also a book and is also a religious tome, and the value that was placed on it. And I know here, for those of you who've had a chance to visit the 7th floor and the treasures of the library, there are some wonderful ancient books that have been preserved. And thank goodness that they are preserved, that they are looked after and they're cared and they're given everything that's needed to be there for future generations, so they're not lost from our memories. And now on to Sharon. And Sharon, tell us about the wonderful book you've chosen to let us into why this book is a favourite and so special for you.
Thank you. And thank you. And I just want to say as well, this has been a fabulous conference. Thank you very much for inviting me here, and it's been a great pleasure to be here to meet everybody. I'm very grateful to everyone. So the book I chose, I brought it with me, and I did take it very personally. So I simply looked at my bookshelf and I touched the books, and I picked the one where there was a real emotional response. And this was it. And it's a book in French by the writer Marcel Pagnol, and it is called La gloire de mon père. I'm sorry for the interpreters, I'm going to say a few words in French occasionally. And I read this book in my teens when I was perhaps 14, 15. Those of you who know the UK education system will know that normally if you're studying a foreign language, you don't study literature until you get to your sixth form, 17, 18. I was at the kind of school where my first year of German, they threw Heinrich Böll at us. And so we had always books. And what was wonderful about that experience is we didn't do examinations in them. We read them for the pleasure. And that's an important point. And the reason this one was the first of the French books that really got me was that my parents loved Provence and the south of France. And I had the great good fortune that my father, who was quite a spontaneous man, would say, "Oh my God, I can't bear this rain anymore. Let's drive down to Provence." And those of you that know France will know that if you're driving down to the south of France, there is an exquisite moment where the light changes and you're going into Provence and the sky becomes blue, the vegetation changes, you can begin to smell the lavender, the pines, and the light transforms. And those of you who've been to art galleries and seen those exquisite Cézanne paintings of the color, the vibrancy that inspired so many of the artists. And even as a child, that hit me. And so I started to read this book, which is set in Provence, written about the childhood, a sort of autobiographical novel by Marcel Pagnol, set in Provence. And it is set at the sort of turn of the 20th century, first decade of the 1900s. And is, yes, a beautiful, perhaps sanitized memory of the summer holidays in Provence and the kinds of characters that you would meet there. And the men playing boule in the square of the village with the metal balls. And the description is utterly exquisite. And I would read this book and it brought back the memories of those moments of hitting that Cézanne vista. And it's so funny, the way it's written, the quotes by this child. And what was so magical about this book for me was that I read it in French. And I did see an English translation, and it was awful, with the greatest respect to translators. That when you read it in French and the way this child, the way as an adult he describes these views and the images, the people, how he behaved. There were some wonderful quotes, and I mean, I felt it so strongly that I actually wrote, if you look at this, it's a bit like Google Translate. I've written in pencil, thinking I would give the book back, but never did. And thinking I could then erase it, but I wrote words to translate, and I wrote a lot of quotes at the beginning, me as a 14-year-old, thinking, oh wow, that is so brilliant. Of course, these are all in French, but I thought there were some wonderful ones, such as un vieillard d'au moins 40 ans, those of you who understand French. Some old person, they were at least 40 years old. And the way I loved the idea of, it's a wonderful suggestion, je composais la symphonie des bruits qui suggèrent une toilette. You can't translate that into English, but it was essentially, I would compose this symphony of sounds that sounded as though I was cleaning myself and washing myself, and it taking at least half an hour to do this. It would have been much quicker to have had a shower, but just pretending to have one while he read his comics. And there were these wonderful little stories and vignettes in there. What this book did to me, though, was to make me realize that actually language was a gateway to another culture. And it made me think, I need to read literature not translated into English, but in the original language. This is what then made me study modern languages at university. This is what made me want to travel, want to work for the British Council, want an international career. And I learnt, I eventually probably spoke about 6 languages, but could probably read in about 10. And that's because I've always refused, I will make the exception with Arabic, I haven't managed that one yet, but I've always refused to read a book if it's not in the original language. And that for me has been something through, because in some ways it almost feels disrespectful to the culture of the author to read in translation. So that has been through my life, which is why whenever I've gone on a posting overseas, I've not only read the literature, I've learnt the language, not always perfectly, but I always try to understand, because speaking in English in a country, you get a completely different view of that culture. And I know I'm different in different languages. And then just a little closure on this story, because in a sense, it goes through my life, and I could tell you many stories. But one little story I will tell you is that when before I joined the British Council, and I used to teach at university, and then I thought I could really change the world, and I wanted to teach in schools. And I taught in a very socially deprived and very multicultural area in London. 2 years, in a very tough school where I taught French, and I remember that I had these girls in my class who were, I used to call them not to their face, but I sort of in my head it was the chewing gum girls, because they'd sit at the back, they'd chew gum and they'd look at me and not really concentrate. And we were coming to the end of the year, and I knew that the books in this series, there were 2 films, which was Jeanne de Florette and Manon des Sources, which were 2 films made in the series of books by Marcel Pagnol, which again were absolutely evocative of this area. And I said, I can take you to the cinema. And they thought this was a great idea. And I was thinking on the way to the cinema, which was some pretentious, arty cinema in central London, taking a group of girls who had only ever watched sort of Terminator 2 or something. What am I doing here? It was in French with subtitles. And I took them in, and they loved it. So the next day at school, I was looking out for them, and I couldn't see them. And I saw them the day after, and they ran up to me and said, "Oh, so good, miss." And if you're British, you'll know this phrase, and I'll translate it. And I said, "Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it." He said, "Yeah, it was so good. We bunked off school yesterday, and we went to see the other one." So they played truant from school, and I was torn between thinking, I tell them off for playing truant, or do I celebrate the fact that they have returned to see actually what was quite a, cultural French film? And that I thought was so marvelous that Pagnol had taken me through my life, and I'd obviously read all his books, and I'd kind of handed that on to another group of girls who then went on to study French. And that's the book that, and again, has shaped how I have approached life and literature, and the excitement of learning enough of a language to be able to read a book that gives me another culture, to converse with people in a different language, is such an extraordinary gift. And I credit Marcel Pagnol and La Joie de mon Père and the fact that I stole this book from my school for that. So there's a sort of very personal response to that.
That's absolutely wonderful. And I think the icing on the cake was the girls seeing the film. As you said, you'd come full circle and you'd passed on your love to another generation. And I will just quickly share the book that I read and still stays with me. It was a book I read first on my own, was The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. And I was 7 or 8. And I remember to this day the joy of meeting this young, unlikable, spoilt girl at the beginning of the book and going on a journey with her to become a better person by the end, to meet people who changed her, other children who changed her, and adults in that way. She arrived from India. She was an orphan. She was sent to live with her uncle in Yorkshire on the grey, dark, forbidding moors. And you can imagine the journey coming from warm India and in a place where she'd had a nanny looking after her. So everything had been done for her. And then she came here, and it was a complete contrast to life as she knew it. But I lived with her through that story, and she became a heroine, and she changed, and that made me think, I can do things, and I've never got over that. I've never got over the dream and the belief that each one of us can change and can become better than we may be, just by dreaming. And books open up whole worlds, and it's so important for both girls and boys to be able to read a story of a hero or a heroine who doesn't start as a hero or heroine, is a normal person with the normal faults and traits, but becomes one. And books are so important, and these kind of stories, whatever they choose to read, make a difference. And just to reflect, the book you wrote, you spoke about, Inspector Jamshed, you read it in Urdu, and the book you spoke about, you read it in French. And Colin's amazing gospel was written all that time ago, and yet it's made a huge impact on you, and the fact that you are there to preserve it and to share it, and it's been digitized. So it's come from centuries ago, and yet modern technology has helped shape it. Now, as I said at the beginning, our wonderful Inspector Jamshed fan didn't only choose that, he chose other books, because why not? He was going to get a platform for this. So tell us, please, Masoud, about the next book that you felt was so important and had made a sort of maybe a mind change or a different opinion of things in life for you.
So firstly, I'm going to find out which school Sharon went to and tell them we found their missing book. I'll briefly speak about 2 books because I'm wary of time, and I do want to mention both just because they impacted my life differently. From a work perspective, and this is when I was coming very early on into what leadership means and how do I lead effectively. One of the books that has really made me think differently is a book called Radical Candor by Kim Scott. And Kim Scott is an absolutely interesting person. She's worked at Facebook, she's worked at many, many other tech companies. But the whole book ideology is about how can we say things more directly, but from a place of care. How many of us in our leadership journeys don't tell people what we actually think? Sometimes we are too nice, and sometimes we say, oh, you're doing an okay job, don't worry about it. When we actually want to say, get things done better. Or sometimes we are too direct and we say, you're doing a rubbish job, not really understanding what impact it will have on their emotions and their career and their future prospects. And what this book allows you to do is think differently about how can you have more direct conversations, but in a very caring, compassionate fashion. And that made me realize that leadership is as much about work and goals as it is about compassion and human behaviors and everything else. So if you've not read that book and you're interested in leadership, please do have a look at that. But the book that really fundamentally impacted me in a very deep way is a very different one. But I need to tell a little bit of a story before I can tell why that book impacted me. It's a healing book for me, and it's all about death, which is really interesting. For those who are Muslims here, there's a very common thing that we often say, which is Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un, that all of us will eventually turn back to God. And that's a fundamental thing very early on I've been taught. But there was a massive earthquake that happened back in 2005 in Pakistan. And I lost my master's supervisor in that earthquake. The whole building collapsed and he passed away. And then I gave about a week in a hospital where I was basically looking after patients. And it was really traumatic for me because at that time I didn't realize this. At that time, I'm just in that adrenaline mode, really trying to help as many people as possible who are coming from all across the place. But it made me feel fearful of death, actually. It made me feel fearful of other things. As most people do at times, I suppressed those emotions like, no, it's fine. I came to UK, I'm now doing my study, I'm working. And those emotions came back into me quite strongly when I had a family, when I had a child. And when you have a child, and if you're a parent here, you would immediately know your thought process changes from what's good for you to how do you make the best life for your children now. And at that time, that kind of traumatic experience came back about, I want to make sure that I'm here to give my children the best life, my boy the best life ever. And I was feeling really fearful of that concept of that death again. And at that time, I was at Lancaster University, and there is an absolutely amazing academic called Professor Sue Black, who wrote a book, All That Remains. And I got to meet her personally. She's one of the most famous anthropologists and forensic anthropologists in the world, if not definitely in the UK. And she took me through some stories, but she then gave me her book, and I read that, and that took me through the experiences of when the 2004 tsunami, Indian Ocean tsunami happened. She was there looking at identifying bodies. And similarly, when the Kosovo war was happened, she was basically there trying to identify through bodies whether war crimes have happened or not. But the way she's written that book, sorry, I'm being very morbid here, but the way she's written that book actually talks about why her work is actually more about life than it is about death. And what that did is it changed my perspective about living life more generously, living life more responsibly, and enjoying every piece and every experience and everything that comes in life. And from that moment onwards, sometimes books do that magic to you, right? They just do a click in your mind. I just cherish life so much. I enjoy every moment of it. I enjoy going everywhere. I enjoy speaking with people in different ways. I have lost that fear because it's a reality that's going to happen. Why not we enjoy it every moment at that time? So that book has had an amazing, amazing impact on me just in a fundamental fashion.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that's something all of us in difficult times, we think about mortality. And so that's certainly going to be on my bedside reading list now. Colin, is another book you'd like to share from something that has touched you along your journey through books and museums and everything else?
Well, I'm an avid reader, but I'll say one thing. When I was a teenager, I was very eager to read James Joyce. I was interested at that time in modernism, and I liked going to modern films. I went to modern theatre, and I was very keen to read Ulysses. And I couldn't read it. I found it so impenetrable and so difficult. And fast forward, I'm not going to tell you quite how many years, many years, decades. Again, this is through my work. The Morgan Library was given a fabulous collection of material by James Joyce. And we were celebrating the centenary of its first publication in 1920. We were celebrating the sort of journey of Ulysses, published in 1922, but not really allowed to be published, and then published in the States in 1933. And I spent the summer reading. I had a crib. I used my iPhone so I could understand how the Odyssey relates to this one day, this 24 hours walking through Dublin. And I realized, I was a good student. I understood the references. I understood the erudition. But what I was not expecting was to fall in love with Leopold Bloom, the hero of Ulysses, who is such a decent man, who is such a kind man, who has lost a child, and that memory of losing a child comes back and is resurfacing at all different moments. I can't possibly tell you the whole story, but it's a 24-hour walk of two men in Dublin. And Leopold Bloom, a Jewish figure who is a sort of secular figure, with a wife who is a wonderful wife, but who's cheating on him with an unscrupulous theatre person, and the other young man, Stephen Dedalus, who's something of a prig, very clever, very, 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 very serious. These two men coming together, and there would be times where these visions would just come from the book, and it also made me go to Dublin for the first time, and that was great too. So in a way, it impacted life. But I also will end by saying it didn't matter that there would be pages where I wasn't really sure what was going on. It was waves. It was waves that came back and forth, and then when they came in full force, funny, erotic, poignant, and very accessible. So I'm very glad to have had a chance to talk about it.
Yes, because I think sometimes we come to a book too early or at a different time of our life, and then the courage to go back and read it again is something to be admired, absolutely. And I think there are books that I tried to read in my teenage years, and I had to come back later and gave them another go, and then realized that I didn't have the life experience to really stick with it. So one of my favorite writers is George Orwell, and you had another book just in case. Just in case you were going to have an opportunity, and it's non-fiction, and it's down and out in Paris and London. If you've read that, it will put you off ever eating in a 5-star hotel.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But apart from that, it is one of George Orwell's best brilliant novels. Tell us what it meant to you, because there's a French connection here again.
There is indeed. There's a bit of a theme emerging, isn't there? I'd read, obviously, a fair amount of Orwell, and I read this in my teens again, and I picked up Down Out in Paris and London, which is not one that's particularly well known, and I read it in kind of one run, so to speak, and it shaped certainly shaped my political and social justice views, because it is, those of you who know it, it's basically living in poverty and working in the kitchens, working in Paris as a plongeur, and that sort of economy of bare survival, and the invisible part of luxury, if you like. And again, you know, Orwell, who has this really acute sense of observation, he also creates an image of Paris, which he beautifully does Paris in a way that you pick those really almost romantic and wonderful ideas of Paris, whilst showing the reality of what it's like to be very, very poor in Paris. And the thing, yes, that does come out of it is the one thing I would never, ever do again in my life, and I have never done since, even when it's been really bad, I have never sent food back in a restaurant, because when I read what the chefs do to people who send food back in a restaurant, you basically, well, I won't go into it, read the book. And so it's one of those things that, even though I've had some really bad meals in my life, I just hang on to it and I think it could be worse. So it's one of those things. But I think for me, it was, you know, an image that, you know, when you're sort of idealistic in your youth, if you like, perhaps, but I say it's idealistic because actually, in a sense, that kind of poverty and survival still exists in so many places. And reading that book and going back to it always reminds me of what I see visibly and what I have been fortunate in my life to experience, you know, a certain amount of privilege, I suppose, but to understand what creates that privilege and to therefore always remember how fortunate I am, and whatever my beliefs and values, that I always try to remember that not everybody has that privilege and that many people suffer, struggle to enable me to have that privilege. So in a sense, it created a certain amount of, I say guilt, but also responsibility, in that with that privilege comes responsibility. And I think that that has been, again, an element that shaped my life, so that I know, you know, for me, it was never a question. I did actually work for 1 week. It was one of those, you know, those terrible mistakes. I worked after university for 1 week in a bank, and it was one of those where, you know, the first day you're told about all the wonderful things that you're going to happen and how much you're going to earn. And I sat there and I looked at the people and I thought, how did I con this bank into thinking I was the right person to come and work here? And this is not my tribe. And I left after a week because I knew that if I'd stayed longer, I would have been in some golden handcuffs. And therefore, I took a very conscious decision to go into, if you like, work that was, which I knew I always really wanted to do, which was around education, which was around culture, and which was in either the public sector or the third sector. And I knew that I would never earn lots of money, and that was an absolute conscious decision, and therefore I have always been quite content with that, and I'm still very happy about that. And I do not regret for a moment that I am not retired at the age of 35 or something with with zillions on some Caribbean island or goodness knows what. And that was so I'm so glad that I worked there for a week, even though I still don't know how I got through the system. I was completely unsuitable for it, but there we go. And
that's a good lesson to learn. I did sort of I think I might have been 16, where you sort of did work experience. So I signed up to Chivers Jam Factory in Cambridge, where there was lots of strawberries going around Cambridge. You could smell it. And Chivers in those days, you could actually smell the strawberries. And I thought, oh, that would be amazing. What I didn't understand, that working in a factory, it was so noisy, and all you did was move jam jars from one place to another onto a conveyor belt, then you moved every half an hour to another place. And I realized that I could never, ever work in those kind of conditions. And then the next thing, which I'm sure wouldn't happen now, we could choose what we wanted to do. So a friend and I went to Fulbourn Mental Hospital at 16 and interacted with the patients. Now, I think today that would never have happened, but it was the most incredible experience that we were speaking to. They were a little bit older than us, but not much older, who had schizophrenia and were there for treatment. And then there were the very long-term patients as well. And it was just something that I've never really got over, that there were people who spent their lives in a mental hospital. Today, they wouldn't. But in that time, you were almost committed, and that was the end of your life. And it was... it's no longer there. It's been repurposed for something else. But it's those experiences as a young person that really shape you. Now, we have, if we've got anyone would like to share a favourite book, please put your hand up. There's one lady here. Please share the name of the favourite book and tell us a little bit about it. Thank you.
Hello. It was... a book about elephants, the elephants graveyard. It was the first primary school, about 10 years when I have read it.
What language was it in?
In Arabic.
In Arabic.
But
so it was the elephant's graveyard, but it
yes,
was in Arabic.
It speaks about the elephants when they feel the death approach, they go for a far place, for the graveyard, to keep their gracious and treasure, which is in their mouth. Yes, it is a wonderful story, novel. It is a small, little, it's about for children. Yeah. Then it was, before that, when I was 8 years, I have read the first novel. It was about a child who is blind. The title was I Saw the Sun.
Wow.
It's a great novel. Yes, and
are you a librarian?
It was a series of Egyptian stories. They impacted my childhood.
Yes. Are you a librarian?
No, I have worked in a library.
Yes.
Of the Ministry of Education.
Okay.
For 2 years or 3 years, yes.
Okay.
But I love books.
You love books. Thank
and
you.
Library. There's a series which is titled. It was the 5 Adventurers.
Well, there's a very
The 5 Adventurers.
In
they are
English.
5 children,
Yeah.
and make good things for their city, for their country, for their friends, for their parents.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. We have time for one last, if anyone would like to share a book or...
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you to our presenter for sharing your thoughts and experience with us and for arranging this wonderful conference to the organizers. My favorite book is the Holy Quran. As Mr. Masood know, I'm also a Pakistani, Pashtun. I belong from Pashtun family. At the age of 4 years, I go to madrasa, where we learn about how to read a Holy Quran, Qaida. We start from Qaida. So the Holy Quran, it's tell you all about your life, how to spend your life, how to be a good person, how to know the other people, you can say that to be to give every person the rights, like a woman rights, like your neighbor rights, like those. And the other book that I have studied is the Siratun Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, which is also about the human beings, the personality of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. He teaches every single thing about life. So it's two books that my favorite, and I will suggest to all the audience that they can read at least one time. It's having their translation in English either.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. So I would like to thank our wonderful... Sorry, one more. Yes, who is it? Dania. Okay, Dania, shout out. Nancy Drew. Wonderful. Books have made Dania believe. And I think that is the thing that, thank you. Books are the way to give us so many different aspects, whether it's empathy, whether it's tolerance, whether it's a belief, whether it's an escape, because sometimes you can be very stressed and you read a book to go somewhere different. You can go backwards, you can go forwards, you can stay in the same place, you can read memoirs, you can read books, management books to help you. One of my favorite management books I can thoroughly recommend is called Surrounded by Idiots by Thomas Friedman. Great. I wasn't looking at you in particular, no. But there's a whole series of Surrounded by Psychopaths, Surrounded by Idiots. He's been to the festival. He's the most wonderful, humorous speaker. The way he writes it, you actually feel embarrassed when you read it. You discover yourself and you think, actually, that's who I am. And the idea is that then you will be more empathetic to team members, but I sometimes need to go and read it 3 or 4 times just to remind myself what I'm doing wrong. So a huge thank you to our wonderful speakers today. And a huge thank you to the amazing delegates who've come at the weekend and all have to go back to work tomorrow. I'm just reminding you, there's no day off, sorry. To have been here and to have made this first initial Dubai International Library Conference such a success and brought it to life. And I can't tell you how thrilled all of us are to have met each other in such an amazing building. So a huge thank you to the Mohammed bin Rashid Library, whose conference this is, and to the amazing team from the Mohammed bin Rashid Library who have worked tirelessly. It's just, there's been some wonderful volunteers who have given up again their time to make this possible, and everyone else who, whatever way you've been involved, from the camera crews to the security guards to the wonderful people who've given us coffee and tea and sustenance over the things, to the people on the information desk. Everyone, you've played a part in making this conference such a success.
مؤتمر دبي الدولي للمكتبات 2024، حيث يجتمع الماضي والحاضر والمستقبل. دبي موئل الثقافات وحاضنة الإبداع، تحتضن بين أركانها مزيجا فريدا من الثقافات والتقاليد، حيث يلتقي التراث العريق مع الفكر الحديث. على مر العصور كانت دبي مركزا للحوار الحضاري وبيئة مثالية لتلاقي العقول والأفكار من مختلف أرجاء العالم، ساعية دوما لتعزيز ثقافة المعرفة والانفتاح. وهنا اليوم في قلب دبي حيث يبنى المستقبل، في هذا الصرح الثقافي مكتبة محمد بن راشد تلتقي نخبة من العقول من جميع أنحاء العالم في حدث يجمع بين أمجاد الماضي وتحديات الحاضر ورؤى المستقبل. أهلا بكم في أول نسخة من مؤتمر دبي الدولي للمكتبات، حيث تبدأ رحلة جديدة لإعادة